Listen to the profound stillness that exists just before the world decides to wake up. It is that fragile, heavy corridor of time, perhaps around 4 or 5 in the morning, when the city outside our windows is submerged in a deep, dark quiet. The streets are empty, the sky is the color of bruised velvet, and the only sounds are the distant, rhythmic hum of a refrigerator or the occasional lonely tires of a night bus rushing across damp asphalt. In this suspended space, nature intends for us to be enveloped in restorative darkness, our breathing slow, our bodies heavy and completely surrendered to the mattress. Yet, for so many of us, this is exactly the hour when the internal noise becomes deafening. We are lying horizontally, swathed in blankets, appearing entirely at rest, but beneath the surface of our skin, an invisible frantic marathon is already well underway. Our eyes might be closed, but our minds are sprinting on a treadmill of calculations. We are lying there in the dark, and before our feet have even touched the cold floorboards, we already feel profound exhaustion. We wake up not with a sense of gentle renewal or a welcoming of the dawn, but with a sudden, sharp flood of cortisol. It is a chemical shock to the nervous system, a biological alarm bell ringing in the center of our chests, whispering a singular, terrifying narrative. We are already behind. We open our eyes, and an invisible ledger instantly materializes in our minds. A brutal accounting of everything we did yesterday, everything we are obligated to do today, and every possible scenario where we might fall short tomorrow. The day has not yet begun. We have not spoken a single word to another human being, and yet we are already in a state of profound deficit. We are plagued by the heavy, suffocating sensation of not having enough time, not possessing enough energy, and fundamentally, deep within our bones, of simply not being enough. When the digital alarm finally shatters the silence of the room, it does not act as a gentle transition from dreams to reality. Instead, it feels like a physical blow, a harsh command summoning a soldier to a battlefield. We do not rise, we brace ourselves. Notice the mechanics of how we get out of bed. We do not stretch expansively like a waking animal, taking up space and filling our lungs with fresh morning air. Instead, we contract. We roll over with stiffened joints. We plant our feet on the ground with a heavy thud, and we immediately begin the arduous process of strapping on our invisible armor. Piece by heavy piece, we construct a defensive shell around our authentic, vulnerable selves. We forge the chest plate of the hyper-competent professional who never makes a mistake. We secure the gauntlets of the perfect partner or parent who always has the emotional bandwidth for everyone else's needs. We pull on the heavy helmet of the flawless, untroubled individual who is effortlessly managing the complexities of modern life. This armor is incredibly dense, forged from years of societal expectations, family pressures, and our own relentless internal critic. We wear it because we are secretly terrified. We are operating under the pervasive, haunting illusion that if anyone were to see us without this iron cladding, if anyone were to witness the chaotic, uncertain, deeply flawed human being underneath, we would be immediately rejected. We are terrified of being found out. We move through our homes, brewing coffee, showering, and dressing, but we are not truly present in any of these actions. Our minds are projecting 10 steps ahead, rehearsing conversations that have not happened, anticipating criticisms that have not been spoken, and fortifying our defenses against perceived threats that exist entirely within our own imagination. We stare into the bathroom mirror, wiping away the steam, and instead of seeing a human being worthy of basic compassion, we see a project that needs constant fixing. We scrutinize the tired lines around our eyes, the slight droop of our posture, and we issue silent, brutal commands to tighten up, to do better, to hide the fatigue. By the time we turn the handle of our front door and step out into the morning air, the transformation is complete. We are fully encased. But let us closely examine the profound physical toll of carrying this invisible iron all day long. Because the mind and the body are not two separate entities, they are a single continuous feedback loop. When the mind is locked in a state of perpetual defense, convinced that it must maintain an illusion of perfection to survive, the body faithfully obeys by locking its physical tissues into a state of chronic, painful bracing. Pay attention to what happens inside the physical vessel as we commute to work, sit at our desks, or engage in casual conversation. The breath, which should be a deep, nourishing anchor dropping all the way into the expansive bowl of the belly, is instead trapped high up in the collarbones. We are shallow breathing, sipping just enough oxygen to keep functioning, but never taking in enough air to signal to our nervous system that we are actually safe. Our shoulders, burdened by the immense psychological weight of trying to control how the entire world perceives us, creep slowly upward toward our ears, locking the neck muscles into rigid, aching cables. Our jaws, holding back the words we are too afraid to speak, the boundaries we are too guilty to set, and the sheer exhaustion we are not allowed to express, clamp down tightly. We grind our teeth in our sleep, literally wearing away the enamel of our bones, because the friction of our waking lives is too immense for the body to process in silence. We walk into office buildings, sit in boardrooms, or scroll through the curated lives of others on our glowing screens, and we feel a deep, echoing loneliness. We look around at our colleagues, our friends, and our neighbors, and from the outside, their armor looks completely impenetrable. They appear so polished, so certain, so perfectly in control of their trajectories. Because we are looking at their polished exteriors through the tiny, restrictive visor of our own heavy helmets, we fail to recognize that they are suffocating just as we are. We are a society of exhausted knights, dragging hundreds of pounds of iron through our days, terrified to admit how tired our legs are, smiling tightly at one another across conference tables, while our internal landscapes are burning with anxiety. This is the epidemic of our modern age. It is not a virus that attacks the immune system, but a creeping, insidious belief system that attacks our fundamental right to exist exactly as we are. It is the toxic paradigm of not enoughness. It is the gnawing imposter syndrome that whispers in our ear during our moments of greatest triumph, telling us that it was merely luck, that we do not deserve our success, and that it is only a matter of time before the world realizes we are a fraud. This belief creates a life of constant, exhausting friction. We are pushing against the natural flow of our own humanity, trying to force ourselves into geometric, perfect molds that do not accommodate the organic, messy, beautiful reality of who we actually are. We push ourselves relentlessly because we believe that if we can just achieve the next promotion, buy the next house, secure the next relationship, or hit the next milestone, we will finally earn the right to take off the armor. We tell ourselves that peace is a destination we must earn through suffering and flawless execution. We believe that relaxation is a reward reserved only for those who have perfected their lives. But the tragic irony is that the armor only grows heavier the longer we wear it. The more we achieve from a place of fear and insecurity, the more we have to lose, and the tighter we must secure the buckles of our defense mechanisms. We become trapped in a self-perpetuating cycle of anxiety, where success does not bring relief, but only a higher altitude from which we are terrified of falling. And so we return home at the end of the day completely depleted. We drag our heavy, aching bodies through the front door, numb out in front of a screen to silence the buzzing in our heads, and eventually collapse into bed, only to wake up in the quiet dark a few hours later, heart racing, ready to do it all over again. We mistake this chronic, painful tension for ambition. We mistake this suffocating armor for strength. But beneath the heavy iron plates, our true, authentic selves are starved for air, desperate for a moment of genuine rest, and crying out for the profound, radical permission to simply be human. We are stuck in a relentless rhythm, entirely unaware that the very tension we rely on to hold our lives together is exactly what is tearing us apart from the inside out. To understand the exact mechanics of how this invisible tension tears us apart, we must examine the very role we have volunteered to play in the grand theatre of our daily lives. We are so often the high achievers, the chronic overthinkers, the deeply reliable individuals who never drop the ball. We are the ones who answer the late-night emails, who anticipate the crisis before it happens, who curate our words, our appearances, and our output with an agonizing, meticulous exactitude. Society looks at us and applauds. Our cultures, our workplaces, and even our families reward this relentless drive, often mistaking our high-functioning anxiety for profound dedication. We receive praise for our flawless execution, our impressive endurance, and our unwavering competence. But this applause creates a devastating dissonance. The louder the external world claps for our achievements, the more deafening the internal alarm bells become, because we know, deep down, that the persona they are cheering for is a carefully constructed, highly volatile fiction. We live in a terrifying split reality. There is the avatar we present to the world, calm, capable, and perfectly optimized. And then there is the reality of our internal landscape, which feels like a fraudulent house of cards waiting for a single gust of wind. This is the agonizing core of imposter syndrome. It is the pervasive, haunting conviction that our successes are merely a series of lucky accidents, a prolonged charade that we have somehow managed to pull off, and that it is only a matter of time before the spotlight shifts, the veil drops, and everyone finally realizes how inadequate we truly are. Because we believe we are faking it, we feel we must work twice as hard just to maintain the baseline. We over-prepare, we over-explain, and we over-deliver, not out of a joyful pursuit of excellence, but out of a desperate, panicked necessity to outrun our own perceived inadequacy. We must ask ourselves what happens to the human animal when it is forced to live in a perpetual state of running from an invisible predator. The body, blessedly loyal and deeply intuitive, does exactly what it is designed to do. It keeps the score. The psychological terror of perfectionism is not merely a mental concept, it translates directly into a violent, physiological reality. Let us perform a deeper inventory of the flesh and bone we carry through the world. Pay attention to the persistent, dull ache radiating from the base of the skull, wrapping around the temples like a tight band of iron. This tension headache is not a random affliction. It is the physical manifestation of a mind that refuses to stop spinning, a brain that is constantly overheating as it calculates every possible variable of failure. Drop your awareness down into the throat. For the chronic perfectionist, the throat is a restricted corridor, often tight, making it difficult to swallow, a physiological bottleneck where our true boundaries, our authentic no, and our desperate pleas for help are suffocated before they can reach the air. Then, move into the stomach, the solar plexus, the center of our intuition. In a state of chronic not-enoughness, digestion is compromised. We experience a perpetual fluttering, a knot of unease, a localized nausea, because the nervous system is funneling all its resources away from the essential resting functions of the body and pumping them into the limbs, preparing us to fight a battle that exists entirely in our own minds. We are physically exhausting ourselves while sitting perfectly still in front of glowing computer screens. To truly comprehend the fragile, dangerous state of this existence, we must visualize our nervous system, our very psyche, not as a machine, but as a magnificent, intricately crafted string instrument. Imagine a cello carved from ancient, resonant wood, designed to produce deep, sweeping, emotionally profound music. Now imagine the strings of this instrument. These strings represent our capacity to engage with the world, our emotional bandwidth, and our internal equilibrium. In a natural, healthy state, a string must have a specific balanced tension. It must be tight enough to hold a clear note, but it absolutely must retain enough slack, enough physical flexibility to vibrate, to resonate, and to produce warmth. But what does the perfectionist do? Driven by the phantom terror of not being enough, driven by the fear that any mistake will lead to ultimate rejection, we reach our hand up to the tuning peg at the top of the instrument. We believe that if we can just make the string tighter, the pitch will be cleaner, the performance will be flawless, and we will finally be safe. So we turn the peg, we double-check the email for the 5th time, searching for a typo that might expose our incompetence. We turn the peg. We replay a casual conversation from 3 days ago, agonizing over whether a mild joke offended someone. We turn the peg. We sacrifice our sleep, our weekends, and our relationships to ensure our work product is unassailable. We turn the peg. With every frantic effort to control our environment and guarantee our worthiness, we stretch the string tighter and tighter. We pull the core of our being into a state of extreme, unnatural tension. The pitch we produce becomes higher, sharper, and increasingly brittle. Yes, perhaps the note is mathematically precise. Perhaps the spreadsheet is flawless, the presentation is immaculate, and the social interaction is seamlessly polite. But the sound we are making in the world has lost all of its warmth. It has lost its depth, its humanity, and its resonant beauty. We become shrill, reactive, and physically rigid. Living as an overtuned string is a state of agonizing peril. When a string is stretched to its absolute maximum capacity, it loses its ability to absorb impact. A relaxed, properly tuned string can be plucked forcefully. It will vibrate wildly, accommodate the friction, and eventually settle back into its resting state, producing a beautiful sound in the process. But an overtuned string has no slack. It cannot accommodate the unpredictable, messy friction of real life. This is why, when we are trapped in the cycle of perfectionism, the smallest, most insignificant inconveniences feel like catastrophic emergencies. A delayed train, a minor critical feedback, an unexpected change of plans, these are not massive traumas, but to the overtuned instrument, they are terrifying. They are the heavy, clumsy finger plucking a string that has no room to vibrate. We live in constant, breathless anticipation of the snap. We are terrified that one more ounce of pressure, one more demand on our time, one more slight imperfection will be the force that causes the string to violently break. And so, we become intensely defensive. We build walls of control around ourselves. We try to micromanage the people around us, the outcomes of our projects, and the perceptions of our peers, all in a desperate bid to prevent anything from plucking our dangerously taut strings. We mistake this frantic control for discipline. We look in the mirror and tell ourselves we are just holding ourselves to a high standard. We romanticize our exhaustion, believing that the suffering we endure is the rent we must pay to occupy space in the world. But look closely at the hand gripping the tuning peg. The profound, heartbreaking tragedy of our condition is that there is no external tyrant forcing us to live this way. Societies may encourage it, the corporate world may profit from it, but the hand relentlessly turning the peg, millimeter by millimeter, tightening the string until it screams, is our own. We are the ones doing this to ourselves. We are inflicting a profound violence upon our own nervous systems because we have bought into the illusion that our worth is conditional, that our humanity is a flaw to be eradicated, and that perfection is a shield that can protect us from the pain of existence. We must deeply investigate this illusion. We must stare directly at the mechanics of our self-inflicted suffering. Because as long as we believe that tighter is better, as long as we believe that safety is found in absolute rigidity, we will continue to wind ourselves up until we break. We will continue to mistake the shrill, painful frequency of our anxiety for the beautiful, resonant music we were actually born to make. The tension we feel is not a sign that we are finally achieving excellence. It is a desperate, screaming plea from our bodies, begging us to take our hand off the peg, to stop the turning, and to question the very foundation of the fears that keep us trapped in this torturous, brittle state. To understand why we relentlessly turn this tuning peg, why we are so terrified of letting our strings hold a natural, flexible slack, we must look to a profound psychological framework mapped out millennia ago, long before our modern era of glowing screens, relentless corporate ladders, and curated digital lives. The greatest observers of the human condition sat in absolute stillness and identified this exact mechanism of self-induced suffering. They did not use the vocabulary of imposter syndrome, burnout, or perfectionism, but they understood the anatomy of our mental friction with surgical precision. They saw how the human mind recoils from the messy, unpredictable nature of existence, and how, in our desperate attempt to protect ourselves from pain, we end up manufacturing our own prolonged torture. We must apply this ancient diagnostic tool to our modern lives, stripping away the heavy armor of our egos to observe what is truly happening beneath the surface. The core of this wisdom rests on a beautifully simple, yet devastatingly accurate observation about how we process the events of our lives. Imagine the inevitable difficulties of human existence as a physical arrow striking the body. This is the first arrow. It represents the unavoidable realities of being alive in a chaotic, unpredictable world. The first arrow is the moment you make a genuine mistake during a critical presentation and the room falls uncomfortably silent. It is the sharp, sudden sting of a rejected proposal, a critical performance review, or the painful realization that you have disappointed someone you care about. It is the flat tire on the way to the interview, the financial setback, the organic friction of simply existing. When this first arrow strikes, it causes legitimate pain. It is entirely natural. If you are standing in front of a room and lose your train of thought, your heart will race, your face will flush, and your stomach will drop. This is a biological reality. The string of your instrument has been struck discordantly, and it vibrates with a harsh, unpleasant sound. The ancient wisdom tells us that this first arrow is not the problem. The pain of the first arrow is finite. It is an isolated event in time and space. The sting happens, the moment passes, and if left alone, the organism will naturally process the shock and return to baseline. We cannot avoid the first arrows of life. No amount of wealth, status, or meticulous planning can build a shield thick enough to deflect the fundamental vulnerability of being human. But observe what we do next. Observe the frantic, terrified reaction of the high-achieving mind. The moment the first arrow strikes, before the initial pain has even had a chance to register and dissipate, we reach into our own quivers, draw back the bowstring, and fire a second arrow directly into the open wound. This second arrow is not fired by the external world, it is fired entirely by us. It is the internal monologue that immediately follows the event. It is the story we tell ourselves about what the first arrow means. The first arrow is, I made a mistake on that project. The second arrow is, I am completely incompetent, and everyone is finally going to realize I am a fraud. The first arrow is, my manager offered me critical feedback. The second arrow is, I am not cut out for this career. I am an imposter and I will inevitably be fired. The first arrow is a brief, uncomfortable encounter at a social gathering. The second arrow is lying awake at 3 in the morning, replaying the conversation on an endless loop, agonizing over our own perceived awkwardness, and concluding that we are fundamentally unlovable. We do not bleed to death from the first arrow. We bleed out because we relentlessly, mercilessly stab ourselves with the second, the third, and the 100th arrow. This self-inflicted wounding is the heavy hand twisting the tuning peg of our nervous system. It is the agonizing force that stretches our internal string until it is dangerously close to snapping. We take a finite moment of natural friction and we weaponize it against our own identities. We transform a temporary action into a permanent state of being. A failure becomes I am a failure. A mistake becomes "I am broken." Why do we do this? Why would intelligent, capable, deeply sensitive human beings subject themselves to this horrific level of self-sabotage? It's because we are operating under the tyranny of the ego, the internal architect that constructs our heavy iron armor. The ego is obsessed with survival, but it defines survival not as physical safety, but as maintaining a flawless, unassailable identity. The ego is terrified of the first arrow. It hates the vulnerability of the organic, unpredictable world. And so, it makes a devastatingly flawed calculation. The ego convinces us that the only way to avoid the pain of the first arrow is to become completely immune to it, and the only way to become immune is to become absolutely perfect. This is the great lie of perfectionism. We romanticize perfectionism in our society. We list it as a weakness in job interviews with a proud, subtle smirk, secretly believing it is our greatest asset. We tell ourselves that perfectionism is the noble pursuit of excellence, the relentless drive to produce beautiful, flawless work. But under the surgical light of true awareness, this illusion shatters completely. Perfectionism is not the pursuit of excellence. It is a profound, fear-based defense mechanism. It is the ultimate manifestation of the second arrow. The perfectionist secretly believes that if they can just engineer every single variable of their lives, if they can work harder, look better, speak more eloquently, and anticipate every possible point of failure, they will become bulletproof. They believe that if they are perfect, the world will never be able to fire a first arrow at them. And if an arrow does slip through, the perfectionist believes it is because they simply did not try hard enough, which justifies the immediate firing of the punishing second arrow. This creates a life of agonizing rigidity. We are trying to control an inherently uncontrollable universe by turning ourselves into static, unmoving objects. But a string that cannot move cannot make music. A human being who cannot tolerate their own flaws cannot experience genuine connection, joy, or peace. We spend our entire lives trying to polish our heavy armor, unaware that the very act of wearing it is what is suffocating us. We are exhausted not because the world is demanding too much of us, but because the internal demand to maintain an impossible illusion of flawlessness drains every ounce of our vital energy. The profound awakening occurs in the precise moment we recognize the separation between the two arrows. It is the shocking, liberating realization that the second arrow is optional. We are the archer. We hold the bow. The pain of the mistake, the rejection, or the failure is inevitable. That is the cost of admission to the human experience. But the suffering, the shame, the agonizing imposter syndrome, the chronic tension in the jaw and the chest, these are entirely self-generated. We are suffering not because we are inadequate, but because we are engaged in a violent, unwinnable war against our own humanity. We are punishing ourselves for the crime of not being machines. When we truly grasp this, the foundation of our imposter syndrome begins to crumble. We see that the feeling of not enoughness is not a factual reflection of our abilities. It is merely the symptom of an overtuned nervous system caught in a trauma response. It is the friction of a mind trying to force an impossibly rigid standard onto a beautifully fluid reality. We are not frauds because we feel uncertain. We are simply human beings experiencing the natural vulnerability of growth. The illusion of the perfect, invulnerable avatar shatters, leaving us face to face with a terrifying but immensely liberating truth. There is no such thing as a perfect instrument. The beauty of the music lies entirely in the organic, textured, imperfect vibration of the string. And until we learn to put down the bow, until we grant ourselves the radical permission to loosen the peg and let the string vibrate with all its messy, authentic humanity, we will remain trapped in the silent, agonizing prison of our own making. Knowing that we hold the bow, knowing that our own hand is the one gripping the tuning peg, brings us to the precipice of profound structural change. However, Intellectual understanding alone will not save us. We cannot simply think our way out of this trap, because the mind, the very instrument we are trying to use to solve the problem, is the precise source of the agonizing tension. We have spent decades conditioning our nervous systems to associate panic with productivity and rigidity with safety. The neural pathways of perfectionism are deep, wide, and heavily trafficked. Therefore, the architecture of our transformation must begin not in the abstract realms of philosophy, but in the dense, immediate reality of our physical bodies. We must learn the granular, step-by-step practice of unbinding ourselves, of consciously choosing to introduce slack into a system that is terrified of letting go. The first necessary intervention is what we must come to understand as the somatic pause. We have to realize that before the mind fires the second arrow, the body prepares for the impact. The physical contraction always precedes the mental spiral. Imagine a typical Tuesday afternoon. You are sitting at your desk, bathed in the artificial glow of a computer screen. When an email arrives, it is from a manager, a client, or a partner, and the tone is slightly ambiguous. Or perhaps it contains a piece of minor critical feedback. This is the first arrow. It is a moment of ordinary, unavoidable friction. Instantly, watch what happens to the physical vessel. Within milliseconds, the breath abandons the deep reservoirs of the diaphragm and shoots upward, becoming trapped in the shallow, fragile space of the collarbones. The shoulders imperceptibly rise, preparing to deflect a physical blow. The jaw, that great emotional vault, locks shut, the teeth pressed together. The string is being aggressively tightened. In the past, this physiological locking would be the immediate trigger for the mind to begin calculating, panicking, and spinning the narrative of our own inadequacy. We would immediately dive into the cycle of overworking or over-explaining to alleviate the agonizing physical pressure in our chests. But now we insert the wedge of awareness. The moment we feel the jaw clench, the moment we notice the breath become shallow, we do not try to fix the external situation. We do not immediately draft a defensive reply. We stop. We draw our entire attention away from the glowing screen and plunge it violently downward into the physical tissue of our own bodies. We take conscious, deliberate control of the physical architecture. We begin with the jaw. We intentionally drop the lower teeth away from the upper teeth. We soften the tongue, allowing it to fall away from the roof of the mouth. We then move to the shoulders, those heavy iron epaulets we have been wearing all day, and we consciously command them to drop an inch toward the floor. Next, we address the breath. We refuse to accept the shallow, panicked sipping of air. We deliberately push the breath all the way down, past the tight knot in the chest, past the fluttering in the solar plexus, deep into the heavy, expansive bowl of the pelvis. We force the abdomen to expand like a balloon. We feel the solid, undeniable pressure of our feet resting against the floor. We are grounding the electrical storm. We are physically, literally taking our hand off the tuning peg and turning it backward by a fraction of a millimeter. By forcefully relaxing the body in the exact moment of perceived threat, we are hacking the feedback loop. We are sending a radical biological signal upward to the panicked brain, whispering a profoundly subversive message. We are not under attack. We are safe. There is no tiger. There is only an email. We are creating a crucial, life-saving gap between the stimulus and our response. It is within this newly created, spacious gap that our true power resides. Once the body has been granted a sliver of slack, we can address the frantic, spinning mechanics of the mind. We enter the second phase of our practice, observing the tuning hand. As the physical tension recedes slightly, the mind will still desperately want to fire that second arrow. The internal monologue will rev its engine. The voice of the inner critic will shout, telling us that if we do not panic, if we do not immediately work a 14-hour day to compensate for this minor error, we will be exposed as frauds and our entire lives will collapse. The practice here is one of radical detachment. We do not fight the voice. We do not argue with the inner critic, because arguing with the ego only feeds it the energy it requires to survive. Fighting the tension only creates more tension. Instead, we step back and we simply watch the urge arise. We treat the frantic, perfectionistic thoughts not as the ultimate truth of our identity, but as weather patterns passing through the sky of our awareness. We visualize that heavy, grasping hand reaching for the tuning peg, and we watch it with deep, objective compassion. We learn to name the phenomenon. When the terror of not enoughness floods the system, we silently say to ourselves, "Ah, there is the imposter syndrome. There is the old habit of panic. There is the fear of being seen." By labeling it, we immediately strip it of its authority. We decouple our core identity from the passing emotion. We realize that we are not the anxious thought. We are the vast, silent space in which the anxious thought is temporarily occurring. We begin to look at our own perfectionism not as a demon to be conquered, but as an exhausted, frightened child that has been working overtime to keep us safe. We acknowledge its effort, we thank it for its fierce, misguided protection, but we firmly decline to let it drive the vehicle anymore. We allow the urge to overreact, to overtune, to overcompensate, to rise, peak, and eventually burn itself out without ever taking action on it. As we consistently practice this somatic softening and mental observation, we inevitably collide with the ultimate terror of the high achiever. The ego will launch its final desperate counterattack. It will present us with a terrifying illusion. If I let go of this tension, if I loosen the string, I will lose my edge, I will become lazy, I will fail. We have been conditioned to believe that our relentless, grinding anxiety is the magical fuel that powers our success. We are terrified that if we drop the heavy iron armor, we will simply disintegrate. Here, we must profoundly redefine the physics of our own resonance. We must look closely at how a master musician actually tunes an instrument. A cello string wound to the absolute breaking point produces a sound that is thin, shrill, and deeply unpleasant. It has no dynamic range. More importantly, it is incredibly fragile. The moment the musician attempts to play with passion, the moment they apply the heavy pressure of the bow to express deep emotion, the overtuned string violently snaps under the strain. It cannot handle the friction of true art. The edge we think we possess is actually profound brittleness. The tension we mistake for ambition is actually a rigid fragility that leaves us exhausted and constantly on the verge of collapse. True high performance, true resilience, and true excellence do not come from rigidity, they are born entirely from flexibility. When a master tunes a string, they leave exactly the right amount of slack. That slack is not laziness. It is the vital, necessary space required for vibration. When the heavy bow of life's demands presses against a properly tuned string, the string yields. It accommodates the pressure, and because it has the slack to vibrate, it takes that heavy, forceful friction and transforms it into deep, warm, sweeping, magnificent music. The slack is what creates the resonance chamber. The slack is what allows the sound to carry across a crowded room and touch the heart of another human being. We must learn to trust the slack in our own lives. We must realize that dropping our armor does not make us weak, it makes us incredibly agile. When we stop expending massive amounts of our daily energy trying to maintain an illusion of flawless perfection, that energy is suddenly liberated. It becomes available for genuine creativity, for deep, authentic focus, and for true connection with the people around us. We discover that we can actually navigate the complexities of our careers and our relationships far more effectively when we are not secretly terrified of making a mistake. When we operate from a state of slight slack, a first arrow, a mistake, a rejection, a failure no longer threatens to snap our entire identity in half. The string simply vibrates with the impact, absorbs the lesson, and eventually settles back into a state of calm readiness. we realize that we can hold ourselves to incredibly high standards of integrity and effort without attaching our fundamental human worth to the outcome. We can strive for beauty, impact, and success not as a desperate attempt to outrun our own inadequacy, but as a joyful expression of our natural talents. This transformation does not happen overnight. It is the quiet, courageous work of a lifetime. It is 1,000 micro-decisions made throughout the day. It is the decision to leave the laptop closed at 7 in the evening, tolerating the agonizing itch of unfinished business, until the nervous system learns that the world will not end. It is the decision to admit to a colleague that we do not know the answer, feeling the terrifying rush of vulnerability, and then experiencing the profound relief of realizing we are still respected. It is the physical act of unclenching the hands while driving, of dropping the shoulders while walking, of breathing deeply into the belly while speaking. Bit by bit, rivet by rivet, we take off the heavy iron armor. At first, stepping out into the world without it feels cold and terrifying. We feel entirely exposed. The wind of reality hits our bare skin, and we feel the urge to run back into the heavy, familiar shell of our anxiety. But as we stand there, breathing deeply, grounded in our own physical presence, the terror begins to subside. It is replaced by a sensation we have perhaps not felt since we were very young children. We notice how light our limbs feel. We notice how much wider our field of vision has become. We realize that we are no longer dragging the dead weight of our own exhausting expectations through every single hour of the day. We are unbinding the strings, letting the wood breathe, and preparing the instrument to finally play the music it was designed to make. When we consistently choose to leave the armor on the floor, when we allow our internal strings to hold their natural, flexible slack, a profound shift in our consciousness begins to take root. We enter a state of harmonic resonance. It is the quiet, breathtaking realization that we can move through the exact same high-pressure corporate environments, navigate the exact same complex social dynamics, and face the exact same daily uncertainties, but without absorbing the friction into our physical tissues. The external world has not magically transformed into a frictionless utopia. The deadlines still exist, the demanding clients still call, and the chaotic unpredictability of life continues to swirl around us. But our relationship to that chaos has fundamentally changed. We are no longer a brittle, overtuned object waiting to shatter upon impact. We have become vast, open, and deeply resilient. Notice the physical sensation of this new state. The jaw remains soft, even during difficult conversations. The breath flows continuously into the deep reservoir of the belly, anchoring the nervous system like a heavy ship in a turbulent harbor. We sit in boardrooms and recognize the frantic, heavily armored energy of those around us. But instead of matching their panic, our own grounded stillness acts as a counterweight. We become the calm center of gravity in a spinning room. We no longer feel the desperate urge to over-explain our decisions or apologize for taking up space. The quiet power of our presence speaks far louder than the anxious, rapid-fire chatter we used to rely on. This grounded stillness is not a temporary psychological trick. It is the natural byproduct of touching the most profound, liberating truth of human existence. The ancient masters understood that our suffering stems entirely from a case of mistaken identity. For our entire lives, we have mistakenly believed that we are the music. We have believed that our worth is inextricably tied to the melody we produce, the titles on our business cards, the numbers in our bank accounts, the flawless execution of our daily tasks, and the applause we receive from the audience. We thought that if the music faltered, if the song was less than perfect, we would fundamentally cease to exist. But the ultimate teaching, the great unburdening of the human soul, is the realization that we are not the temporary music we produce. We are the timeless instrument itself. The music will always change. Some days we will play a soaring, triumphant symphony. Other days, the notes will be discordant, clumsy, and entirely out of tune. Seasons will shift, careers will pivot, and the external markers of success will inevitably rise and fall like the tide. But the instrument, the indestructible core of your awareness, your inherent capacity to love, to witness, and to simply be, remains completely untouched by the quality of the performance. Your worth is not a destination you must aggressively hike toward. It is the ground you are already standing on. You do not need to earn your right to occupy space on this earth any more than a tree needs to earn its right to grow leaves, or a river needs to earn its right to flow toward the ocean. Your enoughness is absolute, unconditional, and entirely non-negotiable. It cannot be increased by your greatest triumph, and it cannot be diminished by your most humiliating failure. When you deeply internalize this truth, the frantic, exhausting engine of imposter syndrome simply runs out of fuel. You no longer need to prove your existence to anyone, least of all yourself. You can finally participate in the beautiful, messy game of life not as a terrified soldier fighting for survival, but as an artist playing for the sheer, unadulterated joy of the experience. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning in the heavy, quiet darkness before the dawn. The alarm sounds. But this time, there is no flood of cortisol, there is no instant ledger of deficits screaming in your mind. You do not brace for impact. You step out of bed, plant your bare feet firmly on the floor, and you leave the heavy, iron plates of perfectionism resting in the corner of the room. You step out of your front door with soft shoulders, a deep breath, and a resilient, open heart, fully prepared to meet whatever arrows the day might bring, knowing that you will never again fire a second arrow into your own chest. The string of your being is perfectly tuned, carrying just enough slack to resonate with the warmth of your shared humanity. The instrument is ready. As you step forward into the rest of your life, unburdened and unbroken, you must ask yourself, if you no longer had to spend all of your precious, finite energy proving to the world that you are enough, what beautiful, authentic thing would you finally have the freedom to create?